I decided to follow my main character, Trelawney, from the beginning because I thought he was somebody who was dealing with this question of how to be in the world as the second generation immigrant in the United States. But as he felt certain frustrations with other members of his family, I wanted to give those other members their own say. So we switch into the second kind of chapter into his father's point of view. And that's where we're able to see the decisions that were made to move the family from Jamaica to the United States and why they made that decision. So each family member hopefully gets a kind of say. I didn't necessarily want the book to have one particular message, but the way I read the ending of the book is one that is quite optimistic because Trelawney has been internalizing some of his problems, some of the questions that others have been demanding of him. And it's around the end of the book that he started to realize that he's creating his own problems and that he can't necessarily blame his older brother for his problems or his father or his parents or all of society for that matter. Certainly they are contributing to a large percentage of his problems, but he also has to, take his own destiny into his hands. And I think the ending leaves us in a place where he's ready to do so. I always wanted to write a novel in which all of the chapters stood alone. For me, it was really a process of figuring out how that was actually going to happen. And as I experimented with, writing one story, maybe from Trelawney's point of view, and then adding the brother's point of view, Delano, it really informed the rest of the book so that each story began to be in conversation with one another. And that kind of led me to writing or figuring out which story to write next. So it was definitely an organic process and one that I couldn't necessarily map out ahead of time. I think Trelawney, in some sense, could potentially find a community that fits for him. I wanted to make sure that I brought in the brother's perspective, that is Delano's perspective, to show that, in some sense, Trelawney doesn't necessarily have to be hyper-focused on some of the questions of identity. At the same time, as somebody who I think is hyper-observant and hypersensitive, Trelawney is somebody who's going to be asking these questions of himself as others are demanding those questions from him. And in that sense, I think that it's a difficult thing for him to find that precise community that is going to accept every aspect of who he is. I think because the book deals with heavy topics such as poverty and racism and exclusion on the whole, it was important for me to include a sense of humor on the page, to include a kind of energy with the language. I also just think that when you think about exclusion in the forms of the ways that we think about race and the way racism operates, it absolutely is naturally absurd. And if I, as the artist, put those scenarios on the page, I think it's a natural thing that people would see the humor. I considered writing a chapter from Sonia's point of view. As we know, Sonia leaves Miami and returns to Jamaica, and I considered writing a story about what it's like to return there. For me, that was really challenging, and I decided that it was so interesting, I prefer to cover that ground in another project and perhaps in a novel of her own.